A single shout stopped a billionaire's spoon midair and exposed a deadly secret lurking in his own home. In the world of billionaires, power and wealth can buy almost anything, but they can't always buy safety. At a secluded mansion overlooking the city, Callahan Vance, one of the country's most influential businessmen, sat down for what appeared to be an ordinary lunch. Within seconds, that illusion shattered. A 10-year-old girl, the daughter of a housekeeper, cried out a warning that stopped his spoon in midair. What she had seen, hidden in plain sight, would expose a plot so cold and calculated it could have ended with a billionaire's natural death. What followed was not just a scandal, but a battle for truth, where loyalty, legacy, and survival collided. And it all began with 4 chilling words: "Don't eat that." Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A little girl's voice was about to shatter a world built on secrets. She was not supposed to be here, and she was certainly not supposed to see. But from her hidden corner, she saw everything, and now a choice had to be made. The Vance estate was less a house and more a kingdom carved into a mountainside. It stood vast and silent, overlooking a city that seemed like a toy set from its panoramic windows. Inside, the silence was just as grand. It was a silence made of thick carpets that swallowed footsteps, of heavy velvet curtains that muted the world, and of the unspoken distance between the two people who lived there. This was the world of Callahan Vance, a man whose name was etched onto skyscrapers and whispered in boardrooms. At 74, he was a titan of industry, a man who had built an empire from grit and foresight. His movements were slow now, measured, but his eyes still held the sharp, assessing glint that had made him a legend. His world was now shared by Delilah Monroe, his fiancée, a woman 30 years his junior. She was a vision of curated perfection. Her beauty was striking, almost architectural in its precision, from her flawlessly styled hair to the blood-red soles of her shoes that clicked softly on the marble floors. She moved through the mansion like its queen, her voice a melody of charm and grace. But to the staff, her smiles were like winter sun, bright but without warmth. They served her with practiced efficiency, their faces carefully neutral. Among them was Abigail Hayes, a woman whose quiet dignity was her only armor. She had been a housekeeper at the estate for 2 years, a job she clung to with quiet desperation. It was the only thing keeping her and her daughter afloat. Abigail was a ghost in the grand hallways, her presence marked only by the gleam of polished wood and the scent of fresh linens. She worked with her head down, her thoughts on her daughter, Clementine. Clementine, or Clemmy as her mother called her, was 10 years old. She had hair the color of pale corn silk and eyes the deep, serious blue of a summer dusk. Today, she was an unwelcome, albeit necessary, addition to the estate's quiet rhythm. The school had closed unexpectedly due to a burst pipe, and the neighbor who usually watched her had a family emergency. Abigail, with no other options, had pleaded with the head butler, and with a heavy sigh, he had agreed. The condition was simple and absolute. The child was to be invisible. Clemmy sat now on a small, stiff-backed chair in a corner of the enormous formal dining room. Her mother had placed her there with a coloring book and a whispered command to be as still and quiet as a mouse. The room itself was intimidating. A chandelier dripping with crystals hung like a frozen waterfall over a table long enough to host a royal banquet. Portraits of stern-faced Vance ancestors stared down from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every move. Clemmy kept her gaze fixed on her book, but her ears took in everything. She heard the distant hum of the estate's climate control, the soft clink of silverware being laid out, and the low, tense murmur of conversation between Callahan and Delilah. They were seated at one end of the long table, a vast expanse of polished mahogany separating them. Callahan was looking at a tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. Delilah was sipping tea, her painted lips leaving a perfect crescent of red on the porcelain cup. "You're not even listening to me, Callahan," Delilah said. Her voice was light, but it carried a sharp edge that cut through the silence. Callahan didn't look up. "I'm listening. You said the charity gala needs a new keynote speaker. I'll have my assistant make a call." His tone was dismissive, his focus clearly 1,000 miles away on stock prices and corporate mergers. It's not just about the speaker, she pressed, her voice a little louder. It's about us. We are supposed to be the hosts. We need to present a united front. People are talking. He finally looked up from his tablet, his gaze tired. Let them talk. Talking doesn't affect the bottom line. Delilah placed her cup down with a deliberate click. Everything affects the bottom line, darling. Your image, my image, our image. That's something you taught me. Her smile was dazzling, but it didn't reach her eyes. She reached across the table, her slender fingers adorned with glittering rings, and placed her hand over his. Let's just have a nice lunch. No business. Just us. Callahan grunted, a sound that was neither agreement nor dissent, and set his tablet aside. He seemed to shrink a little then, the powerful billionaire momentarily replaced by an old, tired man. He looked out the window, his gaze lost in the sprawling view below. At that moment, Abigail entered, pushing a silver serving cart. She moved with a practiced, silent grace, her eyes fixed on her task. She placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of Callahan, the aroma of herbs and rich broth filling the air. Thank you, Abigail, Delilah said, her tone suddenly warm and gracious. It was the voice she used for the staff, a performance of kindness that always felt slightly off-key. Abigail nodded, her expression unreadable. You're welcome, Ms. Monroe. She gave a quick, worried glance toward the corner where Clemmy sat, a silent reminder to her daughter to remain invisible. Clemmy gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes darting back down to her coloring book. But she wasn't coloring. She was watching. She had always been a watcher. Her great-grandfather, Sergeant Elias Hawk Hayes, had taught her to be. He was a decorated veteran, a local legend whose stories of courage and observation were the bedrock of Clemmy's world. The most important battles are won by seeing what everyone else misses, little bird, he used to tell her, his voice a low rumble. Stay quiet, stay alert, and trust your gut. It never lies. Her gut was churning now. There was something in the air, a tension as thick and heavy as the velvet curtains. It was in the way Delilah's smile never quite seemed real, and in the deep, weary sadness in Mr. Vance's eyes. Callahan picked up his spoon, but then his phone buzzed on the table beside him. He sighed, annoyed, and picked it up. I thought we said no business, Delilah purred, though there was no real complaint in her voice. This is important, he mumbled, his thumbs swiping across the screen. He turned his body slightly away, angling the phone for privacy as he read a lengthy email. He was completely absorbed, his world shrinking to the glowing rectangle in his hand. Delilah watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were like polished stones. She then glanced quickly toward the doorway, ensuring no other staff were present. Her gaze swept the room and passed right over the small, still girl in the corner, dismissing her as nothing more than a piece of furniture. It was a mistake. Clemmy saw the shift. She saw Delilah's perfectly manicured hand slip into her chic, designer handbag resting on the chair beside her. The movement was fluid, casual, almost careless. But Clemmy's eyes, trained by her great-grandfather's stories, missed nothing. She saw the flash of glass as Delilah's fingers closed around a tiny vial, no bigger than her pinky finger. It was a dark amber color, the kind of bottle that held medicine or perfume. With a flick of her thumb, she uncapped it. The motion was hidden from Callahan by the large floral centerpiece on the table. Her hand hovered over his soup bowl, just for a second. Clemmy held her breath. She watched, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. Delilah tilted her hand. A few clear, oily drops fell from the vial into the steaming soup. They disappeared instantly, leaving no trace, no ripple, no scent. It was as if it had never happened. Delilah capped the vial, slipped it back into her purse, and folded her hands on the table, her posture the very picture of serene patience. Her expression hadn't changed at all. She still wore that soft, waiting smile. Clemmy felt a cold dread wash over her. It started in her stomach and spread through her limbs, leaving her feeling frozen to the little chair. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. It couldn't be. People didn't do things like that, not in real life. Not in a sunlit dining room with the scent of fresh bread in the air. That was something from movies, from dark stories told late at night. But she had seen it. Her eyes hadn't deceived her. The quick, furtive glance. The tiny bottle. The silent drops falling into the soup. Callahan finished his email, his face grim. He set the phone down with a quiet thud. Trouble with the Singapore deal, he said, more to himself than to Delilah. He picked up his spoon again, the rich broth swirling as he prepared to take his first bite. Delilah leaned forward, her voice a soft caress. Forget about Singapore, my love. Just for an hour. Let it go. Eat your soup while it's hot. The words were kind. Her smile was beautiful. But Clemmy saw only the lie. She saw the tiny bottle. She saw the clear, oily drops. She heard her great-grandfather's voice in her head, as clear as if he were standing beside her. Courage, little bird, is not about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, especially when you're scared to death. Clemmy was terrified. Her heart was a drum beating a frantic rhythm against her chest. She thought of her mother's job, of their tiny apartment, of the shame and anger that would follow if she made a scene. She was supposed to be invisible, a little mouse, quiet and unseen. Accusing a woman like Delilah Monroe, Mr. Vance's fiancée, was not quiet. It was a bomb. It would destroy everything. Callahan raised the spoon. It was halfway to his lips. The silver gleamed in the light from the chandelier. Clemmy's fear was a physical thing, a hand squeezing her throat. But beneath the fear was something else, something stronger. It was the echo of her great-grandfather's integrity. The simple, unshakable knowledge of right and wrong. She couldn't let it happen. She couldn't just watch and say nothing. The moment stretched, feeling like an eternity. In that sliver of time, Clemmy made a choice. She would not be a mouse. She would be a hawk. She pushed herself off the chair. It scraped loudly against the polished floor, a shocking noise in the cavernous silence. She took 2 stumbling steps forward, her legs feeling like they were moving through water. Her voice, when it came out, was not a whisper. It was a raw, desperate cry that ripped through the quiet opulence of the room. Don't eat that. Every head turned. The calm, ordered world of the Vance estate shattered. Callahan Vance froze, his spoon hovering just inches from his mouth. His eyes, wide with surprise, locked onto the small, blonde girl standing in the middle of the room. Delilah's head whipped around, her face a mask of cold fury. Abigail, who had been waiting silently by the serving door, felt the blood drain from her face. The universe seemed to stop, holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Callahan slowly lowered his spoon, his gaze never leaving Clemmy. The silence that followed her shout was profound, heavier and more suffocating than any that had come before. It was filled with shock, confusion, and a sudden, terrifying tension. Delilah was the first to break it. "What did you just say?" she demanded. Her voice, usually so melodic, was now sharp enough to cut glass. It was the sound of a queen whose authority had been challenged by a peasant. She rose slightly from her chair, her body rigid with indignation. "Who is this child? Abigail, get her out of here at once." Abigail rushed forward, her face a pale mask of horror. "I am so sorry, Mr. Vance, Ms. Monroe. So terribly sorry," she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter's arm. "Clementine, apologize right now? What is the meaning of this?" But Clemmy didn't move. She stood her ground, her small body trembling, but her eyes fixed on the billionaire. She ignored Delilah's fury and her mother's panic. Her world had narrowed to one person, the old man holding the spoon. He was the only one who mattered. "Don't eat it," she repeated, her voice shaky but clear. "She put something in your food. I saw her." A collective gasp seemed to echo in the room, though it came only from Abigail. Delilah let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "This is absolutely absurd. Callahan, are you hearing this? The maid's daughter is having some sort of fantasy." She waved a dismissive hand at Clemmy. "She's probably just looking for attention. Or maybe she wants a handout." The words were designed to sting, to dismiss, to label Clemmy as insignificant. But Clemmy's gaze didn't waver from Callahan's. The old man's face was a study in confusion. He looked from the fierce, terrified child to his beautiful, incensed fiancée, and then down at the bowl of soup in front of him. It looked perfectly normal. It smelled delicious. "What is she talking about, Delilah?" Callahan asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. It was the voice that silenced boardrooms. "She's talking nonsense," Delilah snapped, her composure beginning to crack. "She's a little girl making up stories. Abigail, I told you she was not to be in here. This is a direct result of your incompetence. Abigail flinched as if struck. Clemmy, please, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. Let's go. We'll leave right now. She tugged gently at her daughter's arm, but Clemmy stood rooted to the spot. I'm not making it up, Clemmy insisted, her voice rising with a desperate urgency. I saw you. When he was on his phone, you took a little bottle from your purse. A brown one. You put drops in his soup. She pointed a trembling finger at Delilah's handbag, which still sat on the adjacent chair. It's in there. In your bag. This specific detail seemed to land with physical force. Delilah's face, already flushed with anger, went a shade paler. For a split second, a flicker of pure panic crossed her features before being replaced by an even more ferocious rage. You little liar, she hissed, taking a step toward Clemmy. Her elegance had vanished, replaced by something raw and venomous. How dare you, to accuse me of such a monstrous thing? You are a piece of trash, just like your mother. That's enough, Delilah, Callahan said sharply. His eyes were narrowed, his expression unreadable. He was no longer looking at the soup. He was studying his fiancée. He had seen that flicker of panic, too. In his long life, he had become an expert in reading people, in spotting the subtle tells that revealed the truth behind a carefully constructed mask. He turned his gaze back to Clemmy. What's your name, child? He asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Clementine Hayes, sir. Clementine. He repeated slowly, testing the name. That's a very serious accusation you're making. Do you understand how serious it is? Clemmy nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. My great-grandpa Hawk always said. He said telling the truth is the hardest job there is, but you have to do it. No matter what. Callahan's eyebrow raised slightly. Your great-grandpa? Who was he? Sergeant Elias Hayes, sir. Everyone called him Hawk. He was in the war, she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. The name clearly meant something to Callahan. His expression shifted, a flicker of recognition in his tired eyes. He had funded veterans' charities for decades. He knew the names of local heroes. Elias Hawk. Hayes was one of them, a man of legendary bravery, a man whose word was his bond. And this was his great-granddaughter. This changed things. A child's fantasy was one thing. The word of a Hayes was another. This is ridiculous. Delilah cut in, her voice shrill. What does some long-dead soldier have to do with this? Callahan, she is playing you. Are you really going to listen to this street urchin over me? Your fiancé. Callahan ignored her. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the grand dining table. He looked at Clemmy, his gaze intense, searching. He was no fool. He had been surrounded by liars and sycophants his entire life. He knew the look of greed, of deceit, of ambition. He saw it now, blazing in Delilah's eyes. But in the child's face, he saw something else entirely. He saw terror, yes, but underneath it, he saw a stubborn, unyielding conviction. The kind of conviction that couldn't be faked. He made a decision. He picked up the bowl of soup. His hand was steady. He held it for a moment, his thumb tracing the intricate pattern on the rim. Delilah watched him, her breath held. Abigail watched him, praying. Clemmy watched him, her small heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He did not lift the spoon to his lips. Instead, he turned to the head butler, who had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Preston, Callahan said, his voice calm and firm. Take this bowl to the kitchen. Do not let anyone touch it. Seal it in a container. Then, call Dr. Albright. Tell him I have an urgent matter for him. Tell him to bring a toxicology kit. Delilah's face crumpled. Callahan, no. You can't be serious. You are humiliating me. You're taking the word of a child over mine. Callahan finally turned his cold, assessing gaze upon her. She told me what she saw, Delilah. Now you tell me. What's in your handbag? Her eyes darted to the purse, a frantic, cornered look flashing across her face. My personal belongings. You have no right. Preston, Callahan said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. Bring me the bag. The butler, his face a perfect mask of professional neutrality, stepped forward. Delilah snatched the bag, clutching it to her chest like a shield. No. Stay away from me. This is insane. I won't be treated like a criminal in my own home. Is it your home, Delilah? Callahan asked softly, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. Or is it just my house? The room fell silent once more, The unspoken truths of their relationship now laid bare. Delilah stood there, beautiful and defiant, but her eyes were wild with desperation. She looked from Callahan's unyielding face to the resolute child who had brought her world crashing down. The mask was gone. The performance was over. And in the oppressive silence of the grand dining room, everyone waited to see what would happen when the truth was finally brought into the light. Delilah's manicured fingers tightened on her leather handbag, her knuckles turning white. She held it against her body as if it contained the last breath she would ever take. Her chest rose and fell in ragged, shallow breaths. The air in the room was electric, charged with the impending collision of truth and deceit. "I said no," she repeated, her voice a low, trembling hiss. "You will not go through my private things. This is a violation. It's monstrous." Callahan Vance did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. His power was not in volume, but in the absolute certainty of his command. He simply looked at Preston, the butler, who stood as still as a statue by the door. "Preston, secure the bag. Do not harm Ms. Monroe, but do not let her leave this room with it." He then shifted his gaze to a younger, solidly built man in a plain suit who had materialized in another doorway, alerted by the raised voices. This was Arthur, the head of Callahan's personal security detail. "Arthur, please ensure the doors are locked. No one enters or leaves this room until I say so. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Mr. Vance," Arthur said, his voice a calm, professional baritone. He gave a curt nod and stepped back, his presence a silent, immovable wall. The reality of her situation began to dawn on Delilah. The servants would not help her. Her charm was useless against their loyalty to the man who signed their paychecks. She was trapped. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted around the room, searching for an escape route, an ally, anything. She found only the stern faces of the Vance ancestors in their gilded frames, the impassive butler, the stoic security guard, and the unwavering gaze of the old man she had planned to kill. And then there was the child. Clemmy stood near her mother, her small hand now clutching Abigail's apron. She was no longer pointing or shouting. She was just watching, her blue eyes filled with a solemn, heartbreaking gravity. She was the cause of all this, the tiny wrench that had jammed the gears of Delilah's perfectly calibrated machine. "Callahan, please." Delilah tried a new tactic, her voice softening, cracking with a manufactured vulnerability. She took a step toward him, holding the handbag like a desperate offering. "Listen to me. Think about what you're doing. This little girl, she's confused. Maybe she saw me take out my lipstick or my mints. Her imagination ran away with her. You're blowing this into a catastrophe over a child's fantasy." She tried to conjure tears, but they wouldn't come. Her performance was failing her for the first time. "Perhaps," Callahan conceded, his voice dangerously smooth. "But a fantasy is easily disproven. If it's only lipstick and mints in your bag, Delilah, then you have nothing to fear. Let Preston see it. Let us all see it. We can have a good laugh about this misunderstanding, and I will personally apologize for the distress I've caused you." It was a perfectly laid trap, and she had walked right into it. There was no way out. If she refused, she was guilty. If she agreed, she was finished. Checkmate. Her carefully constructed facade finally shattered, not into tears, but into a spitting, venomous rage. "You old fool," she screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "After everything I've done for you, I gave you the best years of my life. I stood by you, I decorated your empty houses, I smiled at your boring business partners, I made you look alive again. And this is how you repay me? You believe a nobody, a child of the help, over me." "The help has a name," Callahan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried more menace than her shouts. "Her name is Abigail Hayes, and her daughter's name is Clementine. And yes, at this moment, I believe her." He nodded once to Preston. The butler began to walk slowly, deliberately, toward Delilah. He was an older man, but he moved with a quiet confidence. Delilah backed away, her eyes wild. She took another step back, then another, until her back was against the heavy velvet curtains of a window. She was cornered. With a final, desperate sob of fury, she did the unexpected. She flung the handbag, not at Preston, not at Callahan, but toward the large, stone fireplace at the other end of the room. It was a last-ditch effort to destroy the evidence. But Arthur, the security man, was faster. He moved with a speed that was startling in such a large man, intercepting the bag in midair with the grace of an athlete. He tucked it under his arm and returned to his post at the door, his expression unchanged. The entire event took less than 3 seconds. Delilah slumped against the curtains, defeated. All the fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her beautiful dress bunched around her, her face buried in her hands. Her quiet, shuddering sobs were the only sound in the room. Abigail put a protective arm around Clemmy, pulling her close. She wanted to shield her daughter from this ugly scene, from the raw, poisonous fallout of the truth. But Clemmy continued to watch, not with triumph, but with a look of profound sadness. This was the cost of doing the right thing. It was messy. It was painful. It broke people. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour, each chime landing like a hammer blow in the tense silence. 10 minutes later, which felt like a lifetime, Preston returned to the doorway. "Dr. Albright is here, sir." "Send him in," Callahan commanded. Dr. Mark Albright was a man in his late 50s with a neat, graying beard and a calm, reassuring demeanor. He carried a small, professional-looking case. He had been Callahan Vance's personal physician for over 20 years, and he was a man of immense discretion and loyalty. His eyes took in the scene in an instant. Delilah crumpled on the floor, the security guard at the door, the pale-faced housekeeper and her child, and Callahan, looking older and more tired than the doctor had ever seen him. "Callahan," Dr. Albright said, his voice steady. "Preston said it was urgent." "It is, Mark," Callahan replied, gesturing toward the serving cart where the covered soup bowl still sat. "I have reason to believe this food has been tampered with. I need you to test it. I need to know exactly what's in it." The doctor nodded, his face grim. "I understand." He opened his case, which contained various sterile containers, swabs, and testing vials. He worked with quiet efficiency, drawing a sample of the soup into a syringe and transferring it to a small, sealed tube. "This will be a preliminary test," he explained, his voice directed at Callahan but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I can screen for common toxins, sedatives, and a few other unpleasantries right here. It will take about 15 to 20 minutes. A full, comprehensive lab analysis would take longer, of course. The preliminary test will be enough for now," Callahan said. As Dr. Albright worked, Callahan turned his attention back to his fiancée. She was still on the floor, but she was no longer crying. She was watching the doctor with a kind of deadened resignation. "Why, Delilah?" Callahan asked, his voice heavy with a genuine, painful curiosity. "Was it the money? Did you grow tired of waiting for me to die?" She lifted her head, her face tear-streaked, her makeup smudged. The mask of perfection was gone, revealing someone bitter and worn. "Waiting," she laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You weren't dying. You are as stubborn as the mountain this house is built on. Every year, the doctors give you a clean bill of health. You were going to live forever. And I was going to get old. My looks would fade. My value would diminish. I would end up with nothing but the fading memories of a life that was never truly mine. So you thought you'd speed things up," he stated, his voice flat. "I earned it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a chilling conviction. "I earned every penny. The lonely nights, the boring parties, pretending to be interested in your dusty old books and your endless talk of legacy. I was a business asset, Callahan. A beautiful piece of art you acquired to make your final years look good. I was simply cashing out my investment." The cold, transactional nature of her words seemed to hit Callahan harder than the initial accusation. He sank back into his chair, the full weight of his 74 years pressing down on him. He had known their relationship wasn't a grand romance, but he had believed there was, at least, some affection, some respect. To hear his life, his very existence, reduced to a financial calculation by the woman who slept in his bed, was a betrayal so profound it left him breathless. He looked over at Clemmy, who was still half hidden behind her mother. This child, this stranger, had shown him more loyalty in 5 minutes than the woman he was going to marry had shown him in 5 years. He gestured for Abigail to bring Clemmy forward. Hesitantly, Abigail led her daughter closer to the table. Callahan looked at Clemmy, his eyes softening. "You were very brave, Clementine," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I want you to know that. What you did took a kind of courage most adults don't possess. Clemmy looked down at her shoes. I was scared, she mumbled. I know, he said. That's what makes it courage. He paused, studying her. Your great-grandfather, Sergeant Hayes. He would be very proud of you today. A small, watery smile touched Clemmy's lips. That was all she had wanted. To do something that would make her great-grandpa Hawk proud. Dr. Albright cleared his throat, drawing their attention. He was holding a small testing strip, which he had dipped into the sample. A distinct blue line had appeared on it. His face was grave. Callahan, he said quietly. It's positive. The preliminary test shows a strong presence of a digitalis-derived cardiotoxin. A concentrated dose, from the looks of it. In English, Mark, Callahan said, his voice weary. It's a poison extracted from the foxglove plant. In small, controlled medical doses, it can be used to treat heart conditions. In a dose like this, it would have induced a massive, untraceable heart attack within the hour. It would have been chalked up to your age and your high-stress lifestyle. It would have been seen as a tragedy. No one would have suspected a thing. The clinical explanation hung in the air, cold and horrifying. Delilah let out a strangled sob. It was real. It was all real. Callahan Vance stared at the soup bowl, then at the woman he almost married, and finally at the little girl who had, without a doubt, just saved his life. His jaw, which had been tight with anger and suspicion, dropped slightly, slackened by a wave of chilling realization and an overwhelming, unexpected surge of gratitude. The world he thought he knew had been a lie, and the truth had been delivered by the most unlikely messenger imaginable. The doctor's words settled over the room like a fine layer of dust, coating everything with a grim, undeniable reality. A massive, untraceable heart attack. The phrase echoed in the silence, a testament to the cold, calculated nature of the betrayal. Callahan Vance stared at the small testing strip in Dr. Albright's hand as if it were a verdict delivered by a hanging judge. The faint blue line was the only thing that stood between him and the grave. He lifted his gaze and looked at Delilah. She was no longer a beautiful, desirable woman. She was a stranger. A predator who had been living inside his walls, smiling at him across the dinner table while planning his demise. The sense of violation was absolute. It was not just an attack on his life, but on his judgment, his legacy, his entire perception of his world. He, Callahan Vance, the man who could read a balance sheet and a business rival with unerring accuracy, had been completely and utterly blind. He felt a sudden, profound exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. He had built an empire to protect himself, to insulate himself from the vagaries of the world, and yet the greatest threat had not come from a corporate raider or a market crash. It had come from within his own home, wrapped in silk and smelling of expensive perfume. He turned to Arthur, his security chief. His voice, when he spoke, was devoid of all emotion. It was the flat, dispassionate tone he used when closing a factory or liquidating a failed asset. Arthur, he said, please escort Ms. Monroe off the premises. She will be allowed to take nothing with her but the clothes she is wearing. Her belongings will be packed and sent to an address she can provide to you. After she is gone, I want the locks on every door changed. I want her security access codes revoked. I want her name removed from every account and every guest list. As of this moment, she is never to set foot on this property again. He paused, his eyes locking with Delilah's one last time. And Arthur, call the police. Tell them to meet you at the front gate. I want to press charges. Attempted murder. The finality of the words was absolute. Delilah let out a choked, desperate sound. No, Callahan, you can't. Think of the scandal. The press. It will destroy your reputation. A flicker of something, perhaps the last ember of his old, ruthless self, glinted in Callahan's eyes. My reputation has survived worse than you, Delilah. Yours, I suspect, will not. Arthur and another guard stepped forward. They did not touch her, but their presence was an undeniable command. Delilah scrambled to her feet, her dignity forgotten. You'll regret this, you old man, she shrieked, her voice raw with hate. I'll tell them you're senile. I'll tell them this is all a setup. No one will believe the word of a servant's brat over mine. But her threats were empty, and she knew it. The evidence was in the sealed bowl. The proof was in the vial that Arthur had secured from her handbag. She was finished. As the security guards flanked her and guided her toward the door, she cast one final, Venomous looked back at the small girl who was the architect of her ruin. It was a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. Clemmy, instinctively, shrank closer to her mother. And then she was gone. The heavy dining room door clicked shut behind her, and the suffocating tension in the room seemed to ease, replaced by a deep and unsettling quiet. It was the quiet of an aftermath, the silence after a storm has passed, leaving devastation in its wake. Dr. Albright began packing his kit. "I'll take these samples to the lab for a full analysis and prepare a formal report, Callahan. The police will need it." "Thank you, Mark," Callahan said, his voice still distant. "Send the bill to my office." The doctor nodded, gave a brief, sympathetic look to his old friend, and departed, leaving Callahan alone with Abigail and Clemmy. The three of them stood in the vast, opulent room, a strange and unlikely trio brought together by a crime. The remnants of the interrupted lunch sat on the table like artifacts from another era. Abigail's heart was still hammering against her ribs. She was dizzy with a cocktail of relief, fear, and utter disbelief. One moment, she was terrified of losing her job. The next, she was a witness to an attempted murder. Her world had been turned upside down. She looked at her daughter, who was staring at Mr. Vance with wide, uncertain eyes. What would happen to them now? Callahan seemed to read her mind. He motioned toward the chairs at the table. "Please," he said, his voice gentle now, and heavy with weariness. "Sit down. Both of you." Hesitantly, as if she were breaking a sacred rule, Abigail sat on the edge of a richly upholstered dining chair. Clemmy clambered up beside her, her small legs dangling far above the floor. They looked utterly out of place in the grand setting. Callahan rested his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers in front of his face. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, trying to find the words for a situation for which there was no protocol. "Abigail," he began, his voice low, "I cannot begin to express. There are no words. Your daughter, she saved my life today. I am in her debt, a debt I can never truly repay." Abigail shook her head, finding her voice at last. "She just did what was right, Mr. Vance. That's all. We don't want anything." She was terrified he would think they were like Delilah, looking for a transaction, a payout. "I know you don't," he said with a faint, sad smile. "That is why I must insist." He looked at Clemmy, his gaze direct and serious. "Clementine, you said your great-grandfather was Sergeant Elias Hawk Hayes." Clemmy nodded. "Yes, sir. I knew of him," Callahan said, a note of respect in his tone. "Never met him personally, but I knew his reputation. He was part of the 101st Airborne, a hero at Bastogne. He was awarded the Silver Star for his bravery. It was said he had the sharpest eyes in the entire division. He could spot a sniper's nest from 1,000 yards. Clemmy's own eyes lit up with pride. "He told me he could see a flea on a dog's back from across a field," she said, her voice filled with a child's innocent awe. Callahan chuckled. It was a dry, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years, but it was genuine. "I believe it," he said. "It seems he passed those eyes on to you." He grew serious again. "He also taught you to be brave, to speak the truth, even when it's the hardest thing in the world to do. Your mother and father must be very proud of you." At the mention of her father, a shadow passed over Clemmy's face. She looked down at her lap. Abigail put a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Her father, he was a soldier, too, Mr. Vance. Like his grandfather. He passed away a few years ago. An accident during a training exercise." The information landed quietly in the room, adding another layer of depth to the day's events. This brave little girl, this hawk-eyed child who had faced down a beautiful monster, was the daughter and great-granddaughter of American heroes. She came from a lineage of courage. It wasn't an accident. It was in her blood. Callahan felt a pang in his chest, a complex emotion he couldn't immediately name. It was a mixture of sorrow for her loss and a deep, burgeoning sense of responsibility. He had spent his life building a legacy of steel and glass, of profit margins and stock portfolios. His own son, from a long-ago marriage, was a stranger to him, a man more interested in his trust fund than in the empire he was set to inherit. Callahan had no one to pass his values on to, largely because he had spent so little time cultivating them in the first place. His legacy was cold, hard cash. But this child, this Clementine Hayes, she was the living, breathing legacy of men who had valued duty, honor, and truth above all else. And she had just handed him back his life. I see, he said softly. He looked at Abigail, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not as a uniformed member of his staff, a ghost who kept his house in order, but as a woman. A widowed mother, working a difficult job, raising a remarkable child on her own. A woman of quiet strength and immense dignity. Abigail, he said, his tone formal yet sincere. You and Clementine will no longer be living in your small apartment. Effective immediately, you are my guests here at the estate. There is a guest wing with its own kitchen and living quarters. It will be yours for as long as you need it. You will want for nothing. Abigail's eyes widened in shock. Mr. Vance, no, we couldn't possibly. That's too much. It's not enough, he countered, holding up a hand to stop her protests. It's the bare minimum. You need to be in a safe place. After what happened today, Delilah is vindictive. I don't want either of you to be at risk. My security team will ensure your safety here. He then added, furthermore, you are no longer a housekeeper, unless you wish to be. I am creating a new position, estate manager. It will be your job to oversee the household staff and the day-to-day running of this place. The salary will be more than commensurate with your new responsibilities. Abigail was speechless. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. Callahan then turned his attention back to Clemmy, who had been listening to this exchange with a child's simple, straightforward curiosity. And as for you, young lady, he said, a warmth entering his voice that had been absent for years. The Vance Foundation has a scholarship program for exceptional students. It covers everything. Private school, tutoring, university, anything you want to study, anywhere you want to go. I am personally awarding you a full scholarship, starting today. Your education is secured, Clementine. All you have to do is keep being the smart, observant, and brave person you already are. He leaned back in his chair, a sense of rightness settling over him, a feeling of purpose he hadn't experienced in a very long time. He had spent the last decade surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His money, his name, his power. Delilah had been the apotheosis of that, the ultimate parasite. But this mother and child wanted nothing. And so, he would give them everything. It was not a transaction. It was a restoration of balance. It was justice. It was the beginning of a new chapter in the long, lonely story of Callahan Vance. The king of a cold, empty castle had just been saved by a little girl with her great-grandfather's eyes, and in doing so, she had opened a door in his heart he thought had been locked forever. The weight of Callahan's words settled upon Abigail, not as a burden, but as a lifeline she hadn't dared to wish for. The guest wing, estate manager, a full scholarship. The offers were so immense, so far beyond the realm of anything she had ever imagined for herself or her daughter, that they felt unreal. She looked around the cavernous dining room, at the stern portraits on the wall and the crystal chandelier that glittered like a galaxy of ice, and felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This was not her world. She and Clemmy were small, ordinary people. They didn't belong here. Mr. Vance, I am a housekeeper, she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if trying to remind both him and herself of her place. I don't know how to be an estate manager. And to live here, it would not be right. We cannot accept such charity. Her refusal was born not of pride, but of a deep, ingrained humility. She had been taught to earn her way, to keep her head down, to never be a burden. This level of generosity felt like a debt she could never hope to repay, and the thought of it was terrifying. Callahan looked at her, and his expression was one of profound understanding. He saw the fear in her eyes, the worry that this was too good to be true, that there were strings attached. Abigail, he said, his voice imbued with a gentle but firm authority. This is not charity. Charity is giving what is spare. What I am offering is a fraction of what your daughter gave me. She gave me my life. She gave me my future. Let me give her one in return. As for the job, he added with a hint of a smile, I have watched you work for 2 years. You are efficient, you are observant, and you command the respect of the other staff without raising your voice. You already know this house and its rhythms better than anyone. You are the only person I trust to run it. He was not just offering her a job. He was telling her he saw her worth. For years, Abigail had felt invisible, a silent pair of hands moving through the background of other people's lives. To be seen, truly seen, was a gift more profound than any amount of money. Tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak, the single gesture conveying her acceptance, her gratitude, her overwhelming relief. Clemmy, who had been watching the exchange with a child's solemnity, seemed to understand the shift in the emotional atmosphere. She slid off her chair, walked over to the old man, and placed her small hand on his arm. Callahan looked down, surprised by the touch. Her hand was warm. It was a simple, trusting gesture that seemed to anchor him, pulling him back from the cold abyss of betrayal he had been staring into. "Thank you for not eating the soup," she said, her voice small but clear. The pure, unvarnished simplicity of her words cut through the complexity of the day. Callahan felt a genuine smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes for the first time in what felt like a decade. "No, Clementine," he said, placing his large, wrinkled hand over hers. "Thank you for telling me not to." That evening, Preston the butler, his professional composure now tinged with a newfound warmth, showed Abigail and Clemmy to the guest wing. It was a self-contained apartment within the mansion, larger and more luxurious than any home they had ever known. There was a spacious living room with plush sofas, a modern kitchen stocked with food, and 2 large bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. Clemmy ran into what was to be her room and stopped, her eyes wide with wonder. The bed was 4 times the size of her cot at home, piled high with soft pillows. A large window looked out over the estate's sprawling gardens, which were now lit by soft, glowing lamps. There was a desk for homework and a bookshelf already filled with classic children's books. For the first time, she would have a room all to herself. She turned to her mother, a grin of pure, unadulterated joy spreading across her face. Seeing that smile, Abigail felt the last of her anxieties begin to melt away. This was real. This was happening. That night, Abigail lay awake in her own comfortable bed, listening to the profound silence of the house. It was a different silence from the one in their tiny apartment, which was always punctuated by the sounds of sirens, noisy neighbors, and the rumble of late-night traffic. This was a deep, peaceful quiet, the sound of safety. She thought of Delilah, a woman who had all of this and had tried to trade a man's life for more. She didn't understand it. All Abigail had ever wanted was a safe place for her daughter to lay her head at night. And now, through the most terrifying day of her life, she had it. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks to her late husband and to his grandfather, whose lessons on courage had echoed down through the generations to save them all. 6 weeks passed. Autumn painted the leaves on the estate's many trees in brilliant strokes of red and gold. A new, calmer rhythm established itself within the walls of the Vance kingdom. The scandal of Delilah Monroe's arrest had been a brief, intense storm in the media. As she had threatened, her lawyers tried to paint Callahan as a paranoid, vengeful old man, but the evidence was irrefutable. The vial from her purse, the toxicology report, her own chilling confession in the dining room. It all combined to create a portrait of a cold-hearted killer. Her name faded from the society pages, replaced by the grim headlines of the legal section. Justice was proceeding, slow and certain. Within the estate, Abigail blossomed in her new role. She managed the household with the same quiet grace and efficiency she had always possessed, but now she was armed with authority and Callahan's complete trust. The staff, who had long disliked Delilah's imperious ways, responded to Abigail's fair and respectful leadership with loyalty. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, shedding the cold, tense atmosphere it had held for years. Clemmy, meanwhile, was enrolled in the city's most prestigious preparatory school. She was nervous at first, a small, public school girl in a world of privilege, but her sharp mind and quiet determination quickly earned her the respect of her teachers. Callahan insisted on seeing her report cards, which he would read with a gruff, satisfied nod. He had made a good investment. The true transformation, however, was in Callahan Vance himself. The event had been a crucible, burning away the cynicism and detachment he had cultivated for decades. He began to work less, spending more time at home. He rediscovered parts of his own house he hadn't entered in years: the vast library, the greenhouse, the sunlit music room. But he was not alone in his rediscovery. He had a small, blonde shadow. He and Clemmy developed an unlikely, unspoken routine. After school, She would often find him in the library, a room she adored. It was a two-story cathedral of books, with rolling ladders and the comforting smell of old paper and leather. Callahan would be reading a dense business journal, and Clemmy would curl up in a large armchair with a book from her shelf, her feet tucked underneath her. They would sit in companionable silence for hours, the only sounds the turning of pages and the ticking of the mantel clock. One afternoon, Callahan put down his journal and looked at her. "Your great-grandfather," he said, his voice startling her out of her literary world. "Tell me a story he told you." Clemmy's face lit up. "He told me lots," she said. "He told me about a time in the war when they were surrounded in a forest. It was cold, so cold the trees cracked from it. They had no food, and they were scared. But every morning, Grandpa Hawk would climb the tallest tree he could find, even while the enemy was watching, just to see the sun rise. He said as long as he could see the sun, he knew they had another day to fight. He said you have to find your own sun to look at, even when you're surrounded." Callahan was quiet for a long moment, pondering the simple wisdom of the story. He had been surrounded his whole life, by competitors, by sycophants, by people who wanted a piece of him. He had never once thought to look for the sun. "He was a wise man," Callahan said softly. "Bravery isn't just about fighting, Clementine. It's about finding a reason to keep fighting. It's about finding something to believe in." A few days later, Callahan called Abigail and Clemmy into his formal study. It was a room of dark wood and heavy leather, a place where billion-dollar deals were made. He stood before a large object covered by a velvet cloth. "I've been making some inquiries," he said, a rare, almost boyish excitement in his eyes, "about Sergeant Hayes. With the help of a military historian, I managed to track some things down." He pulled the cloth away. On a custom-made pedestal was a beautiful glass display case. Inside, immaculately preserved, was a soldier's uniform, the 101st Airborne Screaming Eagle patch still vibrant on the shoulder. Beside it lay a folded American flag, a tarnished but proud Silver Star medal, and a stack of faded, leather-bound journals. Clemmy gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "These are his journals," Callahan explained, his voice thick with emotion. "He kept a record of his entire time in the service. They are your family's history. They belong to you." He then pointed to a framed certificate next to the case. "And that is the charter for the new Sergeant Elias Hawk Hayes Veterans Support Center. The Vance Foundation has fully funded a new facility downtown to provide aid, counseling, and housing for homeless veterans. His name, his legacy of looking out for his fellow soldiers, will live on." Abigail was overwhelmed, unable to speak. Clemmy walked slowly toward the case, her small fingers gently tracing the outline of the medal on the glass. She could feel the weight of her great-grandfather's life, of his courage, right there in the room. She looked up at Callahan, her blue eyes shining. "He would have liked that," she said. "He was always worried about the ones who didn't make it home okay." Callahan nodded, his own eyes misty. "I know." That evening, the three of them ate dinner together in the grand dining room. But it was no longer a cold, imposing space. The long table had been replaced by a smaller, round one, and the room was filled with the sounds of conversation and quiet laughter. Callahan watched Clemmy as she chattered about a science project at her new school. He saw the easy, genuine smile on Abigail's face. This house, for the first time, felt like a home. He realized that Delilah, in her greed, had been both right and wrong. He was a stubborn old man, and he probably would live for a very long time. But she was wrong about his legacy. It would not be the cold, hard empire of his business dealings. His legacy was sitting right across from him. It was in the future he had secured for this remarkable little girl, and in the honor he had bestowed upon her heroic ancestor. It was in the simple, profound act of saving a life, and in doing so, rediscovering his own. The lesson was clear, etched into his heart by the voice of a 10-year-old girl. True wealth was not the fortune you accumulated, but the courage you inspired. It wasn't about the name you built on skyscrapers, but the one you honored for its integrity. In the end, Callahan Vance's greatest acquisition was not a company or a building, but a family, found in the most unexpected of circumstances, a family forged not by blood, but by a single, shouted warning over a bowl of poisoned soup. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.